Joanne Dadisman.
I am thrilled to be in Harlan. And I can't let tonight pass without telling this kind of a story. I'm from northern West Virginia, and we're coal country too. In the early days of mining especially, death rode on the backs of the miners that went in every day. But not just on them. Death rode on the backs of the mules and the horses that pulled the wagons full of coal. And in a mine up in Marion County, there was one horse that they named Big Dan. They named him Big Dan because he was large and he was strong. And the miner who would get him on a day shift was lucky because, you see, that wagon would hold more coal than the others. And one day, a fellow by the name of Bill Hendricks got Big Dan, and he had taken him into the south section of the mine and filled that wagon with coal. And on the way coming out, he stopped there because the rule was if another miner was coming down through the main section, the side sections were to stop. And Bill stopped. Whoa, whoa, Big Dan. And Dan stopped. He threw up his hand as Sam Jensen took his wagon down past and on out to the mouth of the mine. And when he had cleared and the passage was open, he gave him the signal to pull out and to turn. And Bill misjudged a bit. He had overloaded that wagon. And he pulled on the reins a little too hard to the right. And Big Dan made that sharp turn. And the back of that wagon bumped into the mine prop that was holding up and supporting the roof. And it shifted, and it tottered, and it came down. And it came down first as dust and rumbles and bigger pieces of coal broke through that roof, and then a large piece of kettle bottom came down. Now, Sam Jensen heard all this from behind. He was ahead of this at the mouth of the mine. And when the sound had stopped, he came back in. It took him no time at all to see that the driver and the wagon could not be saved. But there was Big Dan. He was fighting for his life. When Sam shined his light, the horse's eyes were huge, white all around. His nostrils were flaring, and he was fighting to get to his feet, fighting to break free of that single tree that held him. And Sam pulled out his knife, and he began to cut the leathers to free that horse. And as he did so, he felt the dust above starting to come back down. The roof fall had not ended. And just in time, with the last cut, the horse was free. And Sam ran for the mouth of the mine, fully expecting the horse to be behind him. And when he cleared the mouth of the mine and he turned around, he was alone. The horse was not there. So when it had all settled, he went back in looking. But Big Dan was nowhere. nowhere to be found. Cave-ins are common. Deaths are common. Work goes on. That was on a Monday. On a Tuesday, the very next day, Sam went in to work a bit earlier than usual. And he got his wagon and a horse and he started into the main section of the mine. And for some unbeknown reason, the axle on his wagon broke, throwing the wagon into the wall, throwing it and pinning him so he could not free himself. And he called out, "Help! Help! Is there anyone to help?" There was no one to help. There was no one to hear. And he began to make his peace, knowing his time here on earth would be very, very short. He also realized that even this accident had started to loosen the roof above him. Another roof fall was about to occur. And then something bammed into that wagon that had flipped over. Something pushed it with such force that Sam realized he could pull his legs up. He could crawl off the top of that broken wagon. And he did. He did. And he ran out of that mine, his heart pounding in his chest. Now, he was not called to be one to go in when it had all settled and the roof fall had stopped. But he wanted to go. He needed to know. And he got in there and he saw the broken wagon. He saw the horse that he had taken into that mine, his body there under the fall. But he saw something else as well. He saw the body of a second horse, and he recognized that horse. It was Big Dan. So on Monday, Sam Jensen had saved the life of a horse, and on Tuesday, that horse had saved the life of a man. And so when we think of our mine heroes, let us not forget that they are not all men and women.
Okay. Denise McCormick. Is Denise still here? I think she's gone. I think she left. Yeah, I think she left earlier. Yeah. Sam Adams.
I want to take you back to 1907. The road from Whitesburg was just a dirt road. It wound over the mountains, through the valleys, and up Pert Creek. And at the head of Pert Creek, there was a little cabin made of logs on a small mountain farm. Springtime, May 21st of 1907. There were no crops planted yet. very few, none up. And there was no man of the house. 35-year-old widow named Ellen Flannery lived there with her 5 children. The oldest was 12 years old. The next one was 10. The youngest was just an infant. Ellen got up, and it was cold still in the house, cool, and she didn't have anything to eat. So she told the children, go pick us wild greens. We're going to have wild greens for supper. So now, you two, Nanny and Robert, you two go out there and do some chores around the farm for me. And I'll be back home in a little while and cook for you. Nanny and Robert were good youngins, so they went off to cook for her, or to do her chores. Like kids do, they played when they got done, and they had a big old time. They came home to that little log cabin. Mommy wasn't there. The stove wasn't lit. There were no greens on the table. So they took care of their 3 younger brothers and sisters, and they waited. And they waited. And they waited. They stayed all night in that little lonesome cabin on the side of Pine Mountain. No mother there with them, just the 5 children. The next morning, they got really worried about themselves and about their mother. And they started walking to find help. Well, the neighbors came and they searched all over the hillside for Ellen Flannery. They searched everywhere and they just couldn't find her. Among the search party was a young man named Floyd Frazier. Floyd was just 18 years old. And he and Mr. D.I. Day, his old teacher, had gone up on the mountainside. Mr. Day said, well, I'm going to look down in the bottom of this holler and see if I see her. And Floyd said, well, she ain't down there. There ain't no use in looking down there. She's not down there. They said, well, Floyd, we don't know. We ain't looked yet. Well, he went down in the bottom of the holler, and sure enough, there he found Ellen, stabbed to death, most of her clothes ripped off, and her head bashed in with a 60-pound rock. All around her were footprints that had an odd pattern of hobnails in the heel, like somebody that didn't really know how to fix a shoe had fixed these shoes. Well, they kept looking and they found a tree. Her hair stuck in the bark where she'd been pushed against that tree, and blood on the bark. They found her bonnet under another rock, and they found a pocket knife not far away. From there, they tracked those footprints to a fence with a bloody handprint on it. And those footprints were leading straight back toward Floyd Frazier's house. Now, Floyd didn't have the mind of a full-grown person. Floyd was kind of childlike. Matter of fact, he played with Nanny and Robert. They were play buddies. And he was 18, and the oldest one there, Nanny, was just 12. Well, they made Floyd pull up his coat sleeves, and there was blood on the sleeves of his shirt. They made him take his coat off, and he had a big, long, bloody scratch down the middle of his back that had bled through his shirt. Oh, that come from the bars. I was crawling through the bars looking for her, and that's where that come from. They checked the bottoms of his shoes, and there was that odd pattern of hobnails in the bottoms of his heels. Well, they arrested Floyd, and they took him to jail in Whitesburg. Took 3 years, 3 escapes, a suicide attempt. But they finally convicted Floyd, and they sentenced him to death. something that had never happened before in Letcher County history. Been there since the county was formed in 1842. This is 1910 now, and they had never before convicted anybody to die, sentenced anybody to die. Well, Floyd was a member of a fairly prominent family too. His mother didn't have much, but his uncle was a well-known man in the county. And there were letters flying back and forth to Frankfort, to the Court of Appeals, to the governor's office. All of them, please have mercy on Floyd. Floyd is not capable of knowing what he did. In April, they went up on the College Hill where the schoolhouse sits now, the old schoolhouse, and they built a gallows for Floyd Frazier. And on the day that he was to hang, a telegram came in Sargent, and they gave it to a horseman, and he rode across the hills and the valleys with all the speed that the horse could carry him, 10 miles down to Whitesburg. And it was a stay from the governor. Don't hang him, we've got to investigate this further. Well, they did. And Floyd just didn't seem to understand. He laughed with the men that had been building the gallows when they measured him to see if it was going to be right. They found poison in his cell because somebody had brought it to him so he could cheat the hangman. But finally, on May 19th of 1910, just 2 days short of the 3rd anniversary of Ellen's death, the hangman came for Floyd. They picked him up in a carriage and they rode up Main Street toward the College Hill. Now, Whitesburg in 1910 had a population of 700 people. Just 700 people. A handful of houses. The only brick building in town, only 2 brick buildings, was the courthouse and Floyd Frazier's uncle's house across the street. But on that day, the population of Whitesburg swelled from 700 to 3,500 people. They gathered around the foot of the hill in the farm fields on what had been the old Tyree farm. And they watched and they waited. The women in their big hats with the flowers and the long dresses, the men in their planter hats and their vests, their Sunday best. And when the carriage started down Main Street, they began to murmur. He's coming, here comes Floyd. Look at that, up there, ring it there. About time for this thing. What are we going to do? The sheriff asked him to come up, asked the preacher to talk to him. He said, now y'all need to be quiet. This is serious business. A man's about to lose his life. Well, they helped Floyd up on the gallows, up the steps. They asked him if he had anything to say. And he said, my mother had nothing to do with this thing that they are trying to get her into. She is as clear as the angels. Because some people thought his mother was jealous of Ellen because of a man, and that's why he killed her. But he had 18 people that he wanted to talk to that day. Some of them wouldn't come. But he told his teacher, Mr. Day, you whipped me too hard when I was in your schoolhouse. I didn't do nothing to deserve that, and you was mean to me. And he told Sheriff Lewis Cook, Lewis, you can do something for me that I cannot do for you. Well, I don't know what it is, honey. You can take my life, but I cannot take your life. And my life is as precious to me as yours is to you. Well, they told him, Floyd, you mustn't feel hard at him. So they grabbed him, and he struggled, and they put him onto the trap, and they put the noose around his neck and the hood over his head. And Floyd yelled out, goodbye, everyone, forever and ever. My mother. Oh, my mother. Sheriff Cook cut the cord that held the trap, and Floyd dropped through. Took 11 minutes for him to die. Somebody finally paid a little boy to go swing on his legs and speed things along. They cut him down, took him to the cemetery, and the sheriff cut little bits of rope and gave it as souvenirs to each person that was on the scaffold that day. And they took the main one to the courthouse. To this day, every house around School Hill, every building has a ghost story. And on Perk Creek, where it joins US 119 between here and Whitesburg, people see a woman in white on the road that they call the Bride of Pine Mountain, right near where Ellen's body was found. And in the springtime, when the moss starts to grow, there's one tree that the moss looks like a woman's hair.
Well, just look at this. I bet you're wondering, how did I get this egg on top of my head? And just look at this goo running down my forehead and my eyes. It's just disgusting. Well, let me tell you what happened. Today, I got up, the phone rang about 9:30, and it was that nice pastor at my church, Reverend Brown. And he said, "Miss Imogene, we're having a special dinner Sunday. Could you make me one of your 12 egg white angel food cakes? Just special." So I love that cake. And she said, "Oh, Pastor, I'd be happy to." So she was all happy and whistling and doing her morning dishes. And she thought, "Oh, I need to go down to the Piggly Wiggly and get a dozen eggs for my 12 egg white angel food cake." And today, my favorite bagger's on duty, Brandon. Oh, he's handsome. He's in college, you know, and he's so nice to me. So she got in her car, and she drove down to the Piggly Wiggly. And before you know it, she was there. And she parked, and she went inside, and she was happily going about her way through the grocery. And she got her dozen eggs, and she got a few other things she needed for the cake. And she thought, oh, that 7-minute frosting would be nice on it. So she got the ingredients for that. And then she went on down the aisles to the checkout counter. When she gets to the checkout counter, she's looking all around. She does not see Brandon anywhere. And she thinks, oh, I don't need to worry. He's probably out helping some lady with their groceries get in their car. There's no reason to worry. And her favorite checkout girl was on duty, Juanita. Oh, she really liked Juanita, and Juanita was always asking after her family. And she appreciated that so much. It's the niceties that make people proud to live where they live. And Juanita was very nice. So she waits her turn, and she gets up there, and she starts to put her eggs on the counter. And then she pulls out the other things that she's bought for the cake, and she puts them on the counter, and she looks around. No Brandon. Well, where could he be? So she gets up to Juanita, and Juanita's checking her items through. And she says, Juanita, where is Brandon? Well, Miss Imogene, you know, he had to take that test today for him to get into law school. You know how smart he is. And he had to take that test today, and there was no way around it. We had to let him off, you know, so he could do that. And she said, well, who's going to bag my groceries? And And Juanita looked at her, and she said, "Oh, well, I guess you are." And she said, "I don't bag my own groceries. I come to the Piggly Wiggly for that service, and I expect to get it. Now, I demand that you bring someone in here right now and have them bag my groceries. I'd rather it be random, but if it can't be, then someone else will have to do it." And Juanita said, "Well, Miss Imogene, there's no one else available right now." "I don't care. You call the manager, you call whoever you have to, but you get someone down here." So Juanita looked at her, and she said, "Miss Imogene, this is a day to turn over a new leaf, girl. You need to bag those groceries." And Imogene said, "Well, I never. And Juanita looked at her, and she said, "Well, how'd you have been? I've seen the pastor's car parked in front of your house on Wednesday afternoons. What's he doing there, huh? That's the day his wife plays bridge. What's he doing over at your house?" And Imogene said, "Well, I never. I heard you did quite well." And Imogene says, "Well, I'll just take my business to the IGA. That's what I'm going to do." And Juanita goes, "Well, I heard they don't have bag boys over there either. And they have self-checkout. You won't like that a bit. And they don't have paper bags. They have plastic bags." Well, Imogene looks around. Still no sign of a bagger in sight. And she says, "Well, I just cannot bag my own groceries. I have just had it, and I just demand service." So Juanita takes the egg carton, carefully opens it up, selects the nicest egg out of that carton, and plop on my head. Well, that's how I got the egg all over my head. And I said, "Well, how am I going to make my 12 egg white angelwood cake for the church lunch for Pastor Brown?" And she said, "Well, I guess you're going to have to make an 11 egg white cake. And let's face it, that's one less thing you'll have to bag."
Susanna Holstein.
Y'all see how I did that right there? Come up those steps?
It was great.
I know, wasn't it? There are days that don't happen. Well, I thought maybe I'd change things up a little, maybe do a ballad or two. They're not terrible long ballads, so I don't know, am I allowed to do 2 ballads? Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. All right. Let's see, which ones am I going to do? This. How about a Christmas carol to start out with? This is one y'all maybe haven't heard. I don't know. It was collected in North Carolina by the folklorist John Jacob Niles. It's one of my favorites. It's an odd one. It's based on the Corpus Christi carol, and it's pretty old. I'm not sure just how old. Some people think it has traces of the Arthurian legends in it. So let's see how this goes. Down in yon forest be a hall, sing May, Queen May, sing merry. 'Tis coverlet over with purple and pall. Sing all good men, for Sing make we may sing merry. 'Tis stained with blood, is cardinal red. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. By that bed there is a stone. Sing make we may sing merry. On which the Virgin did atone. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. Under that hall is a gushing flood. Sing make we may sing merry. From Christ's own side 'tis water and blood. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. By that hall a shrub tree grows. Sing make we may sing merry. Since his birth it blooms and blows. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. On that pallet a young squire lays. Sing make we may sing merry. His wounds are sick and soon he weeps. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. All hail that hall where none can sin. Sing make we may sing merry. For it's gold without and silver within. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. Sing all good men for the newborn baby. I really like that one. I think it's the strangest Christmas carol I ever heard. Just a happy little tune, you know? Well, let's have another happy little tune. This is another one of my very favorites, one of the child ballads. It's the Great Sulky of Sulskerry, the Great Sulky of Sulskerry. I wish I could remember the child ballad numbers. I never can. But y'all know child ballads, right? Collected by Francis James Child, a Harvard scholar, went to England, collected them, put them together in his 10-volume work, and numbered them all. So that's why they have numbers. And that's the quick and dirty version of the history of ballads. Okay, let's try this one. An earthly Norris sits by the sea, and there she sings by lily wing. Little know I, my bairn's father, be he of land or of the sea. And then there came to her bed feet, and a grumbly guest, I'm sure was he, saying, here am I, thy bairn's father, though I not be comely. I am a man upon the land, I am a sulky in the sea, and when I'm far from any strand, my home it is in Sulskerry. It is not well, the maiden cried, it is not well indeed, cried she, that the great Selkie of Sulskerry should have come and given a bairn to me. Then he's drawn out a purse of gold, and he has laid it at her feet, saying, take thee up thy nurse's feet, and give my little son to me. And it shall come to pass on a summer's day, when the sun shines hot on every stone, that I shall take my little son, and I will teach him to swim the foam. And you shall marry a great gunner, and a gunner good I'm sure he'll be, and the very first shot that e'er he shoots, he'll kill both my little son and me. And earthly Norris sits by the sea, and ere she sings by Lily Ween.
All right. Mechalina? Okay. Last but not least, our last storyteller. This has been a wonderful collection of stories, hasn't it? We'll tell it. Everybody, come on.
There once was a king who had 3 daughters. And one day he called the daughters into him, and he said to the oldest one, "Daughter, how much do you love me?" And the daughter says, "Oh, Daddy, I love you. Oh, like I love you more than anything else in the whole wide world." And this pleased the father, and he sent her along. And he called in the second daughter, and he says, "Daughter, how much do you love me?" And she says, "Well, Daddy, I love you, oh, more than the moon and the sun and the stars." Well, this really pleased Daddy, too. And he sent her on the way. And then he called in his youngest one, and he asked her the same question, "Daughter, how much do you love me?" And she thought for a moment. You see, he was really interested in her answer because this was his favorite child. And when she said, "Daddy, I love you more than meat loves salt," he was not pleased. In fact, the more he thought about it, the angrier he got, and he called in his guards, and he chased her out of the castle and out of the kingdom. And she soon found herself on the road with no place to go, and she walked and walked and walked until she came to a marsh. And she decided to make a garment of the reeds that were there. And she made a round hat to cover her hair and the crown she still had on. And she made a skirt of it, and then like a robe, so that every piece of her garment was hidden. She didn't think it would be too wise for folks to know that she was a princess. There were just too many unseemlies about. And she walked and she walked and she walked and she walked. And finally she saw another castle on a hill. Now, she didn't feel like she could go to the front door, so she went to the back door and she asked if they might possibly have some work for her to do. And she says she'd do anything. And the cook's there saying, "Anything, huh? Well, we don't need anyone, but since you're willing to work for free and you'll do anything, come on in. I think we can find something for you to do." Well, she didn't speak much, and she wouldn't give her name. So they started calling her Cap of Reeds or Cap of Rush. And she did what she'd said she'd do. She would help with everything. And she was a very kindly soul, and she soon had the love of everyone in that kitchen staff. Well, as in many kingdoms, there was a young son of marrying age, and his father had decided that there would be 3 nights of balls in hopes that his son might find somebody in the kingdom that he might be interested in marrying. the dad really wanted to bring the family along. And so the women, even the women in the kitchen were invited. And so they were all getting dressed up and all excited. And they said, oh, Cap of Rushes, you sure? You got to come with us. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. And she said, oh, I worked really hard today. I think I'll stay here and go to bed early. Now, they couldn't believe she would do this, but they couldn't talk her into going for love nor nothing else. So off they went. And when they'd been away for a while, she takes off her cap. She takes off the Rush's robe and the Rush's skirt. And considering all the work that she was doing and had been doing, her princess dress was still in pretty good shape. She just had to fix her hair a little bit. Those Rushes had done their job. And so off she walks. And she was the last one to arrive at the ball. And when she came in and stood at the doorway, the room, all of a sudden, was silent. They were all wondering who this princess was. And of course, the young prince soon made his way up to her and asked for a dance, and nobody else could get a dance in the rest of the night. He wouldn't leave her side. But around midnight, she smiled and slipped away. She knew she had to get back to the kitchen before anyone else. And so she got back to the kitchen. She put her reed cap on and her reed coat and her reed skirt and was sound asleep, or at least seemed to be, by the hearth. By the time all the excited co-workers had come back, and they're shaking, oh, Cap of Reed, you should have seen this woman. Oh, she was beautiful. And the prince was so captivated by her. You've got to come tomorrow and see her. Oh, maybe. And she rolled over and went back to sleep. The next night, all the co-workers tried again to get Cap of Reeds to come with them, but nothing they could say seemed to make much difference. And shortly after, the last one had left and had plenty of time to get down the trail. Once again, she took off her cap of reeds. Her cape, she set aside. Her skirt, she set aside. And she went again to the ball. And again she was last, but the prince was waiting for her this time. And when she arrived at the door, he was there, and he would not let her out of his sight. But she again, around midnight, slipped away and back to the kitchen. And of course she had her cap back on, her cape back on, her skirt back on, and was seeming to be fast asleep when her co-workers came in, and again with very great excitement shook her and shook her. You wouldn't believe it. And they went on and on about everything they'd seen this beautiful princess do. And the next day they were saying, oh, this is your last chance. You have got to come and see this princess. It's your last chance. And they, again, could not talk her into coming. And so, as soon as they were off, she put her cap aside, her cloak aside, her skirt aside, fixed her hair, and off she went. The prince told her that night that he wanted to marry her. But before he could say much more, she slipped away again. And she felt so bad about it because she did like the prince. But by the time her co-workers were there, she was back with her cap on and her cloak on and her skirt of reeds all on. And she was asleep by the fireplace. There were no more chances. And of course, her co-workers woke her up and told her all about how the princess slipped away again, and that how upset the prince was. Oh, and he was upset. He searched everywhere for this princess. The surrounding countries, the surrounding countryside, everywhere he could think. And after about a month of searching and not finding her, he became ill. It was really more heartsick because he couldn't imagine marrying anyone else. And they sent for the physician, but nothing seemed to be working. And finally, Cap of Rushes had heard from the cook that he needed some gruel. They were at least trying to get some gruel in him. And she says, let me make it. And she did. But she slipped a ring. The ring that he had given her that night before she had said one way or another what she would do. She'd ended up with the ring. She slipped it into that gruel. And the cook managed to get him to eat it, but at the bottom, he saw the ring. Where did this come from? Where did this come from? And they said, well, Cap of Rushes made the gruel. So he said, send for her. And he called her. They called her up, and she wasn't quite sure, and the cook was afraid she was going to get in real big trouble. He held the ring up to her and didn't say a word. But she shook her head, took off the cap of reeds and the cloak and the skirt, and there stood his princess, having hidden out all that time in his very own kitchen. And so they were to be wed. She consented, and they made a real big party of it. They called to it sent invitations to all of the other kingdoms. And she'd heard in the meanwhile that her father had not fared too well, that her father had married off his older sister and the next one. But he had been lonely in that house. Their mother was long since gone, and it was quite lonely there. So he'd gone to live with the oldest sister, but she couldn't be bothered with him. And so very, very soon she was packing her off to the other sister. The other sister said, well, I don't have room for you in my kitchen. You're going to have to live in the stables. Well, living in the stables sort of made him unstable. And this word had gotten back to Cap of Rushes. And she said, when she sent the invitation to the oldest sister, and to the second sister, that they were only welcome if they brought the father. Well, they were really nervous about this because, as I said, he was a little bit on the unstable side. He was losing it, missing his youngest daughter. Now, at the wedding feast, the cook and Cap of Rushes had an interesting conversation. She said, you may not put salt in any of the dishes. And the cook says, it'll be awful. He says, that's all right. It'll be fine. And the wedding was done, and the feast had begun, and the food was being served. The oldest two sisters had been served, and they made horrible faces when they tasted that food. And one started, she's afraid if she said anything, but it was really hard to keep it in. They were both big grumblers. But when her father took a bite of the food, he started to sob and weep. And Cap of Rushes came up to him and she said, sir, why do you weep? And he said, my daughter once told me that she loved me like meat loves salt. And I didn't understand what she meant until now. And I've lost her forever, and I can't tell her how sorry I am for running her off. And she said to him, Father, don't you recognize me? And she took his face and gently tipped it up so that he looked her in the eye. And he sobbed even more as he stood up and embraced her. I wish I could say that they all lived happily ever after, but I guarantee you the two older sisters did not. And that's the way some things need to go.
Okay? So, Libby gets to choose out of this basket a name tag. Zelda, you got a free registration for next year's conference, which will be somewhere in Lexington, probably the Lexington area.
Wow.
And so you will give me your email address and I'll send you the certificate that you'll need to send in to get your free thing. I'll send you a certificate, but
Thank you.
give me your email before you leave. Presenters, Adam and presenters, if you'll see Ed, who's in the very back, he has your checks. So you get money as you go out. I mean, how much better does it get than that? Thank you all for coming. It's been a wonderful conference. Thank you for your cooperation. I want to thank Art TV for being here and filming. And I want to thank Libby Tipton and Kathy Metcalf for their work. Our youth tellers and all of our storytellers. Have a good evening.